realize in promising that I overextended myself. But if you'll bear with me and be patient and take what I say as not definitive, but an explorative examination or consideration of a very complicated series of ideas and principles within this tradition. And then, you know, if it's clear, it makes sense, don't end there. Continue to do your own investigation. And where it's not clear, also continue to investigate on your own. This is just preliminary. I myself continue to explore this in different ways. And what I'm going to try to do tonight is give you some of the theory and also some of the spirit of it, because I think the two are very important to grasp. If we get too theoretical, it can become very murky and sterile. We won't feel the chi moving in our cultivation. Yet if we don't have enough theory, we'll also stumble along in our practice and be swept around by various states. And so whatever that balance is going to be different for anybody at different times. At certain times, you're going to need more theory than you are practice. And other times, you have enough theory, then you need more practice. It's a saying, once you've read 10,000 books, you should walk 10,000 miles. If you walk 10,000 miles, maybe it's time to check out a couple books. And so you have to find this balance for yourself. And I'm not so sure what I do tonight is going to be balanced, so I can tell if somebody fall asleep it's not. And that's okay. But I think it's time to go into this a little bit and try to unpack it some. What we're referring to, what brought this up, and actually the person who asked the question isn't here, so that's okay. But if you ask again, I'm not going to go over this again. So we're looking at page 41, and this is a section, just as your reference point, the Master Huineng has presented to his listeners an extended analogy of these principles of cultivating oneself and what our potential is. And he is then using this page, particularly 41, to draw a comparison between the human body and the city of what he calls the Pure Land. You could also say he's drawing a comparison between the human body and a kingdom, and then our own nature and our own mind. So it's not just he's drawing between the Pure Land, because he's saying the Pure Land is in fact your own mind. And so is the defiled land your own mind. But what he's saying here is it's both metaphor and analogy, but it has a kind of literalness to it as well. So it's a very complicated analogy. But let's just start with a basic thing that's going on. This basic essential principle that the Buddha, a Buddha, an awakened being, not some historical being, but an awakened being, a fully awakened individual being, literally enlightened one or enlightening one, is not some transcended figure that lives in another realm or in a heaven or in some place beyond. What the essential teaching is here is that Buddha, small b for the sake of this discussion, is a potential and a capability that all of us possess within our human nature. And so Buddha nature and human nature are not here presented as two different things. Now, they could be different manifestations of a common thing, which is called the nature. And that's what's referred to here. So in Chinese, it's called Xing, or it's called Zixing, or sometimes Foxing. Buddha nature, self-nature, nature. However we use it, what it's saying is human nature is this nature, and this is also the ground, nature, the potential capacity for all the manifestations of the human and all realms of existence. Stem from this very fundamental capacity, and it's whole and complete, though not manifested or realized fully across that spectrum. Okay, so this is the important thing to understand, that it's not outside of the human that we find, discover, realize, awaken this. It's within the human. And that's why he says looking for this outside of this world and our relationships in the human is like looking for a rabbit with horns, is the verse in here. So it's very graphic what he's saying. Now that being said, the next step is, well, and here's the key terms we've been sort of wrestling with, and please help me out, Yuan, with the Chinese, or all of you who know Chinese. Most of you know it better than I do. This is a joke, but you tolerate me, and that's very nice. We're talking about nature, which is xing, okay? And I'm not gonna, if we had a board up here, we could put this all up, but let's just not do that. Xing is a nature, and then we're talking about something called mind, which in Chinese is xin. So it's xin, and nature is xing. Okay, so X-I-N if you're doing the pinyin, X-I-N-G for nature. Okay, and then we have another concept called shi, which is translated as consciousness. And I think those were the three we were talking about last week. We're not going to go into everything. We're going to look at those three concepts. Xin, which is mind, xing, which is nature, shi, which is consciousness. Now, in this formula that's presented to us, for example, if you go to page 20, right at the top, he talks, in this first paragraph, he talks about things being non-dual. Non-dual meaning there's an integrity and wholeness to the functioning of all these things, and they seem to be two, self and other, inside and outside, this life and another life, and so forth. And he's saying that duality is actually a fabrication of the mind. It's a splitting up of a fundamental unity to all phenomena and all noumena, okay? Now, but that's the realm we operate in all the time. We're in the non-dual realm. We don't realize we're in the non-dual realm. We take it to be the real thing because we've habituated to it for so long that we don't even, we can imagine maybe non-dual, but it's an imaginary thing. You know, in a good moment, in a good morning, when things are going cool, the oneness of it, oh, yeah. And then the self comes in and splits everything into 100 different things. But in this passage, what's really critical here, he says, ordinary people think of the skandhas and the sense realms as dualistic. The wise person knows they are non-dual. The non-dual nature is the Buddha nature. So now what he's saying here is this potential we have for this Buddha functions in a non-dual way. And when it's not functioning properly, it functions in a dual way and splits up all these things. So let's just take, that's background. But the skandhas and the realms are what we're talking about here. So now let's go into what the human is from this model, which is a very different model than a Western model of looking at a human being or the mind or anything. So one of the problems we're going to have is, first of all, on the Western side, there's a very different approach and a very different set of ideas, conceptions, formulations, and even assumptions operating on these terms like consciousness, mind, nature. And I don't want to go there tonight, and we could go there and you could spend a whole undergraduate education and still be murky about, because not everybody within the tradition agrees on what that is. Kant's sense of the mind is very different than Blake's, which is very different than Emily Dickinson, which is very different than George Bush's, okay? But they all use the same word. So I don't want to go there tonight. I'm just saying that's one side. The other side is you think, well, let's get to the Buddhist side where it's really crystal clear and easy. Nah, not. And the reason that is many. One is a teaching that says this is a fundamental true reality description of things, but not everybody sees it in its complexity and nuance clearly. So the degree of what they would call wisdom or insight then determines to what degree you see the nuance and complexity of mind. So on a very simple level, you think it's just my thoughts and so forth. But when you have a full reach of its capacity, you start to see it's very, very nuanced and includes many, many things. And so one text will talk about it in this very nuanced, complex way, which we might call the consciousness-only teachings. Okay? And other texts will just talk about it in a very fundamental way. Guard your mind, be mindful, so on and so forth. And so even within the tradition, psychologically, philosophically, there's this whole range where the same word is used in very, very, very different ways. Then you have a problem or a challenge that over time, as Buddhism, or as this basic teaching, not only takes shape in the complexity of India, and anybody who's been to India and thinks the Buddha was teaching in India to a very simple, clear, no way, no way. You have a whole substratum of thoughts, philosophies about mind, about nature, about consciousness already existing. So the Buddha is having to negotiate that space with his particular understanding of this in a culture that already has these preconceptions. Now you take that and you start to move it to Central Asia, to Japan, to China, to Southeast Asia, and finally to the United States, and you'll see that different, if you want to call them schools or different understandings, around these same terms emerge, so they're not used the same way in these different traditions. So this is why I started to realize when I said I would answer this question this week, what am I done? Because, you know, it's really complicated, but the spirit of it isn't, so that's the good part. So we'll start with first the bad news, and then maybe we'll end with the good news. So the bad news, let's just take it at one level, and those, again, who have Chinese, please help me with this. Let's take that character xin, which, if I draw it, I have to draw it backwards, but basically, how many people know the character have seen it? Okay, so it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And so it looks like a hook or a crescent moon with 3 dots. That's a characterization of that. Now, that word in Chinese has a range of meanings and applications because basically, again, what I want to stress is 2 things. In this description of these terms and where they're working, in most cases, they're not describing things or entities. Okay? So the words seem very precise, but when you try to say, oh, the mind, that is where exactly? Well, it's here. Or is it here? Or is it here? Or is it there? You know. So the first thing to grasp here is that the fundamental difference between sort of a concrete, materialistic, almost scientific approach is to want to have everything existing empirically in things. And this system of thought sees the, let's say, mind or consciousness as a functioning rather than as an entity. And so it's a functioning and made up of many corresponding parts and components in relationship, in a dynamic relationship. And it's no place that it really is. And that's why they say, but there's also no place it is not. Because it's distributed. It's not a localized entity, organ, or so forth, but a distributed functioning. So that's one, nuance. I knew you saw last week it was going to clear things up. I'm not sure it is. Then you deal with something like nature, and it's also not talking about a metaphysical entity, but it's talking about a capacity or potential. And it really is manifest in a becoming rather than something you have. It's something you are. And it's something you're becoming rather than... So already, if you think of it as functioning as capacity and functioning, that helps you drop back and say, oh, I want to know what the mind is. Is the mind red, blue, black? Is it square? Is it... No, no, no. Well, is the nature located here or there? No. It's a functioning and a capacity that's within the whole range of the human. So let's go back. Now I'm going to just digress all over the place because it gets complicated. But, for example, Chinese xin. So I have heard the expression xiao xin, right? Little mind. But what does that really mean? Be careful. Oh, xiao xin means be careful. Oh, that's interesting. Then you hear fa puti xin. And that xin means to resolve, to aspire, to set your will and intentionality on bodhi. Okay. And then you hear, like last night we had another Xin. It was Shengmie Xin. Now what does that mean? That means birth and death mind. Well, wait a minute. So there's Shaoxin, be careful. There's resolve on Bodhi mind, all Xin. And then there's birth and death mind. And then there's Foxin, which is the Buddha mind. Now, all are Xin. Well, which one? Where do we go? And you have Wangxian, which is the false mind. And you have Zhenxian, which is the true mind. And there's got to be hundreds of more, right? And they're all Xin. So what are we talking about? You're saying, well, where is that exactly? It's not a thing. You see, it's a functioning of a mental range or continuum that's really quite expansive, from the littlest things down to watch and be careful where you step. Shaoxin means keep your mind attentive to details. To the Daxin, which is embraces. So when they say, Yi Che Wei Xin Zao, everything's made from this mind alone, wow, this is talking about the accomplished, perfected mind that sees that the Dharma realm and this mind are non-dual. That's different than Shaoxin, okay? And not just in Daxin and Shaoxin, it's different in total application. So when the verse goes, 3 dots and a hook like a crescent moon, all Buddhas are born from this, and those with fur and horns come from it too. So now it's saying this is a capacity functioning, and when it's used in a certain way, this fundamental thing, it manifests along a spectrum from the very confused and afflicted and tied up to the great and beyond conception almost. But it's the same. So this is why when we use Xin in this text, when he uses Xin, well, what is he talking about? Which one of these? Okay, so that's one of the complexities. The other thing that happens is if we look at, we talked about the skandhas last week. So in this framing, what we call the human that he's using on page 41, that the Buddha arises from the human, he's talking about the human in a very specific way. And what these texts have done, these ancient texts have done, is gone into this in some delineation to sort of map out a vision of the human in terms of its multiplicity of these functions and capacities that we don't necessarily have, again, in a Western framework. And so, again, not only if we access it in the original language, Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, whatever, it's not necessarily, oh, it's really clear now, and then we just have a problem of translating, because even in those original languages, you can see that the interpretation understanding is a combination of the study of the language and some self-understanding of how it actually is working and functioning in order to be able to translate that into a living situation rather than an abstraction. So this becomes complicated. When he says the skandhas here, this is one way of looking at the human, that the human is not just this single entity, but it's made up of 5 corresponding, interrelated functions. Now the first one is just the material, rupa, okay? And then the other 4 are associated with the mental. So it's almost a reverse of the Western, if you think about it. The Western has mind, and then it has this whole delineation on the physical. So it's a really interesting, I hadn't thought about that. So rupa is just matter, it's the material, okay? But then the other 4, sometimes those other 4 are called mind or mental, or sometimes chitta. So chitta is sometimes used to refer to the other 4 skandhas, which is the mental functioning. And these consist of, what's the next one? So there's rupa, Vedana, right? Vedana, which is? Yeah, sometimes translated as feelings. Okay? So there's rupa, there's Vedana, thank you, not Vedana, Vedana. Vedana sounds like a yogurt. Vedana sounds, okay, sorry. Vedana. And then what's the third one? Now we're into, or the second of the mental. Come on, you know, don't be polite. Huh? Samjha, right? Which means perception, cognition, conceptualizing, second of the mental. The third of the mental, in Chinese, xiang, is? Samskara. Could be activities, could be will, volition, could be habitual, deep in, tendencies and so forth. That's that one. And the last one is called Vijnana. And that means, yeah, what does it mean? So that's, okay, roughly consciousness, or Vijnana, divided knowing, okay? Okay. So now, if you look at it, you're saying, wow, Rupa only gets one, and these other four. Why? Because in this understanding, this tradition, through actual direct experience, those who have practiced and looked into this see that the mental is far more determining and influential and significant than the physical. And so the emphasis then went into examining this in great detail. These texts we're dealing with really don't go much into the physical. You mean, well, wait. So if you look, example, let's take the other, I'll reverse this a little bit. So you have a physical. That's a physical, right? An exam. I'm going back, okay? Or a body. You have a body exam, but we call it a physical because that sounds better. And so the body, what is that body? Well, it's just a body. Yeah, but now let's unpack it a little bit. Well, you have a respiratory system. It's got these systems going. It's got respiratory, or pulmonary. You've got a cardio system going. You have a reproductive system. You have an endocrine system. Who else? What else? Lymphatic system. Circulatory. Whoa. You got all these systems, and then you got all these organs. So you say the body, but you got kidney, liver, spleen, pancreas, blah, 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 right? And then you start to delineate, and you got the body, but then you got these systems, and you got these organs, and you got these tissues, and then you got these cells. And if you really go into it in a total physical way, you have then the electrons and blah, 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 and you break it down to the quantum, and it's gone. And you reify it back, and it comes back to the body. Now look at the continuum there of one thing we call the body. I'm making an analogy here. On these texts, the mind gets that kind of scrutiny, that kind of diversity, and looking at it. And yet, when you talk about it, you say, well, I'm looking at the cardio system. It doesn't exist by itself. It's like, oh, yes, well, I left my heart at home. You don't do that. Okay? You move around, you got everything, and you can't just say cardio function, pulmonary function, endocrine function. They're functioning simultaneously. Now, we like to think, when you go to medical school, you take these all apart and you look at them as separate entities. But in fact, they don't operate that way. So one of the first shocks for medical doctors when they graduate, they're dealing with people. Oh, wow. And they're dealing with people where this is all functioning. Moreover, they're dealing with people who in their bodies have strong feelings and emotions that release endocrine systems like cortisol and so forth that affect other things. And you're going, oh my God, this is too complicated. I've got to send you to subspecial, special. Right? And you think when you go in, you're getting treated, but you're getting only one section treated, but not the whole. And the understanding of how that whole works is almost a lost art. I just read a very interesting assessment. Now you see how much I digress, but here we go. An interesting assessment. This is my mind, and the mind is also called the monkey, and the monkey rambles. But the year the monkey's coming up. I just met a couple monkeys. They are all excited because the next new year is the year of the monkey. Yeah. So get ready. But in any event, the discussion was why doctors, practicing doctors, especially those in the specialties areas, but all practicing doctors seem to not have, for want of a better word, good bedside manner. They don't have compassion and empathy. A lot of the times, they're very cold and clinical. Okay? So you come in and say, well, test shows that you're in the first stage of cancer. We have a number of treatments available to you. I can't predict for sure. The 70% here, and the choice is yours. Thank you. Woo. And the person blanking out and crying, the doctor's going, God, I don't want to deal with that. I'm clinical. And they discovered the reason for this was that the doctors did not come in with this sensibility, or lack of it. They came in with a humanitarian impulse, but their training diminished that sensibility. And particularly, this is very interesting, in particular, one phenomena had more influence negatively on human capacity for feeling in the doctors than others. And it wasn't just, oh, each thing's considered separately and so forth. What was it? The one practice where they do the dissection of the human corpse. So the actual working on a not living being, but a corpse, allowed them to distance themselves from the human body and all the things associated with it, and gave them a model of a relating that was dehumanized in a sense of the only dealing with the clinical aspects of the body. And so even when they're seeing you through that lens.
We're walking corpses.
We're walking, dissecting corpses. So it's almost like even before you donate it to science, at the end of your life, it's already in their purchase. Now, I'm not criticizing, I'm just describing that. Then therefore, how you can look at it changes how you relate to it and so forth. So that attention, what we do to the body, is reversed in this system where it's given to the mind and the functions of the mind. And now you see there's feelings, which include tactile, which also include emotional. And there's a whole next one that has to do with perceptions and conceptualization, how we reify and interpret and change things. We don't necessarily see things as they are. Okay, this is like our neuroscience is starting, and we call it neuroscience. We don't call it mind study. We call it neuroscience. And it's starting to note that we do not, in fact, see things as they really are, but some combination of things that are some way, and then our frame or projection of them, our perception or interpretation of them, including our relationships. And that's why the same person over time can be very different to you, even though they haven't technically changed, because your interpretation based on your feelings and attachments, hurts, and everything else, has changed your perception of them. That's why men go through training to kill other men, because their fundamental perceptions of those other men have to be altered away from brother, fellow being, to enemy, to non-being. And that's a psychological, physical training of military induction that prepares them to go out and do these things, where in fact they're no longer seeing other human beings, but they're seeing enemy, and sometimes rats or gooks or whatever the word is that's used to dehumanize. Same beings, but now the perceptual has been changed by this. So you see the fluidity here that's being talked about. So you have forming feelings. And then this really interesting one that they go into, which is the samskara, which is not only your will and your intention, but your will and intention formed or formated over time in certain ways so that you have deep habitual tendencies, often unavailable to your conscious mind, that are moving and generating your behavior, thoughts, and feelings, and the very way you pick up on things. And we think that we are attuned, but in fact what we're doing is filtering. Wow. And projecting. And then finally this elusive thing, and you know, we're going to try to get into a little bit tonight, there's none of this conscious, well, what's that about? What's going on there? Whew. Okay, so at this point, any questions? And please don't ask any questions. Okay, so you're getting a little feel of where this text is going. Now, if I could go back to what the Sixth Patriarch is saying, sometimes these words are used interchangeably. For example, xing, zixing, foxing, that's essential nature or self-nature. Self-nature means self-existing, not contingent upon all these other things. So it's not something that's a conditioned dharma. It exists in and of itself, not conditioned by other things. Or Buddha nature are basically the same thing. Now this also is used in the text to also talk about original face, fundamental nature. And then it's used further to talk about Buddha nature, which is the original nature, which is the fundamental nature, which is the essential nature. You see all these terms move. And so when you read this, you have to understand you're not getting exactly at different things or phenomena. These are just different ways of talking about something. Now, I used to think this was sloppy thinking. You know, if you're taught with any precision of the use of language, you know, you get that definition, make that term count, get it really precise. I don't think this is sloppy. I think this is almost intentional. And I think it's intentional for a number of reasons. One, I know for sure that if you crystallize it into a clear, precise context, you'll actually think that it exists in and of itself like that, where in fact they're just talking about facets or functioning of something. So you will get attached to that as a reified thing and not see these are just different ways of talking about something that's very vast and fluctuated and dynamic and fluid and so forth. It's a functioning rather than empty. The next thing that goes is they're very clear that this is only, these concepts and terms are only used to point to what is true, but they aren't true in and of themselves. And so that's why it says, words and language, concepts, are fundamentally false or provisional, but we use the false to point to the true. So when you say, oh, this Buddha mind, immediately, where's mine? I want my Buddha mind. I want to get my Buddha mind. And we think it's something you get rather than stepping back and saying, these are just words and language pointing to something that doesn't have this fixed nature about it, in the sense that it's a thing that you get, because you wanting to get that is also a false language. Oh, wait a minute. Now, I can understand how you could say what I want to get is false, or it's changing, but the me that wants it, uh-oh. See, now you're back to this phenomenon. The texts are also saying, by the way, that's also an imaginary fabrication. What? Yeah. And so then we're at the difficulty here, because as soon as we talk about a self, we think it's referring to me. And what it's talking about is the not self, the not me, which liberated from this narrow myopic little thing turns into something else, which is the full awakening of Buddha. That's why it says Buddhas not only are not self, they are not. What? Wait a minute. Yeah, because to say they're Buddha is to also now reify it into some entity. So it's the full capacity functioning, you see again? It's not an entier thing. So it's like, when do I get a Buddha and all that goes with it, like those really groovy gowns, the lights, the long ears, and all the jewel ornaments, and my little elephant to ride on. That's what we imagine. You say, no. It doesn't work that way. That's reifying it into something itself, and that's a fundamental problem. So you can see how this starts to get tricky. It gets tricky in the sense that they have to use language that points to the true, but doesn't solidify it in such a sense that it stimulates your craving and wanting for it. And moreover, it has to be so that you can't really wrap your mind around it. So it's not just accidental or sloppy thinking or Eastern mysticism. It's designed behaviorally not to allow you to set up. So that's why it has a number of ways of referring to it, and you keep asking, well, where is it, when do I get it? And they keep pulling the rug. So you see why it's not just a philosophical, but it's a psychological work of language and conceptions that are supposed to help us understand a little bit, but not too much. And help us get at something without feeling that we're getting something. And so there's a constant unease that's involved in exploring these texts and cultivating them, and it's by design. It's by design. That's why this text says, the goal is to let your mind be unattached, clinging, seeking, wanting, craving nothing. Whoa. Now, it sounds like if I don't seek, I don't crave, I don't want, there's nobody. Tricked. You see, what that's proposing, though, is this is the irony. It's proposing the absence of that is the true arrival. It's the true self, the one that there's no seeking, craving, whatnot. But our ordinary mind at that point bulks. And you'll see later in the encounters, there's one section where one of the disciples gets really excited about cultivating, really excited about Bodhi and Nirvana, and then has this thought, when do I get it exactly? Because he suddenly realizes that it's connected with something with emptiness. So he's saying, no, wait a minute. If the arrival is empty, then who gets to enjoy nirvana? And then the sixth patriarch starts this wonderful dialogue you may find disturbing because it's like, and your very not wanting is arriving. You're attaining nothing to attain is the attain. And so, on one hand, almost he immediately understands, and then the fog comes back in. And you saw it with, what's his name, Ming, who's the, I forget the martial artist. Ming Hai? No. Hui Ming. So Wei Ming's the same way. Wei Ming wants it. Wei Ming's really, he's salivating for it. He chases it. He wants to get it, and the patriarch says, by the way, it's not about a robe and bowl, it's about an understanding. He said, well, he didn't really want the robe and bowl anyhow. I really wanted the understanding. He says, well, what is it? He says, just your mind is a Buddha. Fo zhe shi xin. Wow, really? Great. He's all of a sudden, he says, that's it? Is there another secret, perhaps? You see, that play there that's going on is, even if we see it and we understand it, that ordinary mind, that dysfunction kicks back in and wants to turn it into something. So that you can see why this becomes hard to get the mind around a bit. So let's see what we can say more about. So this is rendered then, Fo Xing, Zi Xing. Xing is also Buddha nature. It's also interchangeable with Tathagatagarbha, which is called the matrix or the embryonic womb of the awakened one. And so in this text, when he says here at the bottom of page 41, the enlightened nature of the Tathagata radiates this effulgent light on the ground of your own mind. But basically what it's saying is your own awakened nature is the Tathagata. So again, instead of thinking of Tathagata as some particular individual, Buddha, you're talking about another expression of your awakened nature is the Tathagata. So you can see the language, you have to get away from this language as pointing to real entities that exist in these lands and whatnot and hold court and grant favors and blah, blah, blah. This whole thing that we do with this is at best metaphor. At worst, it's superstitious because it takes us away from the real of what it's describing, which is this is all within our human potential when cultivated properly and awakened. So this then becomes the use of, say, all the language of nature. Okay, because you could say, well, is it mind ground or is it nature? Because the text says both here. It's not talking necessarily about two different things. For example, this nature that's being talked about here, this potential capacity, when the mind is completely functioning properly, not attaching, not grasping, not seeking, just fully functioning, the mind and the nature are not two, they're one. You see? So it says, light up your mind, see your nature. But if you see your nature and your mind is already lit up, they're not two. So although they're described functionally in these ways, and then we go into there's a consciousness, there's 5 consciousnesses, then a 6th consciousness, then a 7th consciousness, and the 8th consciousness, and you say, well, which one's the big one? I want to, it sounds like the 8th, but maybe number 1 is, no. You start going, and it says, these are just different false language to look to a different way of seeing a functioning that in fact is continuous and unbroken and whole. In the same way that the body's organs and the circulate, this is all working as one, right? So in the same way, the mind and consciousness works in this way as well. So that's why this text, later on, there's this wonderful verse. He says, you can talk about 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, but don't mistake them for real things. They are merely functionings. And then it says, and if at the place of turning, you don't cling to and crave any emotional attachment, you're always in the full wisdom of the Tathagata. You're in the natural samadhi. And then it's all one again. So the nature, the mind, the 10,000 things, you can use them interchangeably because you're describing a function or awareness of them rather than separate entities. I don't know. It's really hard to say this because even what I'm saying is a bit seemingly hard to get it because it's language that can be misleading. That's why in the 10th ground of the Avatamsaka, it says, okay, relax. Okay? Basically what we're talking about is learn to use your full capacity. Get rid of what's false, what's distorted, what leads you to klesha and knots and affliction. Keep removing, keep working until this mechanism, or whatever you call it, this nature, is fully functioning, unattached, unbound, liberated. And that is Buddha. That's the Tathagata. That's the Pure Land. That's your essential nature. That's the mind lit up. Whatever you want to call it, that's that. It's this. Some they just say, Rushur. That's it. It's like it really is. Anything less than that is it's a same thing, but now being used and functioning in different ways, and they can call that a lot of different things, dukkha, afflictions, and they can make lists of that. But then they say, but those afflictions, that dukkha is in fact bodhi. What? Because now you see how that would work. Turned this way, it becomes that. Reversed and turned, it becomes this. It's not two different things. It's just two different uses or functioning of the same capacity. And then the text uses, the substance of the liquid is here. Here it's water, here it's ice. Okay? It's not two different things. And the nature of a living being and the nature of the Buddha are fundamentally the same. They're not two different things, different functionings. So that's why I myself have to catch myself every time I go into these texts to try to reify them into things. And I try to turn them into, then, well, this Vijnana, is this the same as Shin or Shur? And you go, no, here it says Chitta is this. Oh. So I'm reading the Theravada text and he says, I'm meditating, my Chitta ran off. No, not the cheetah with the spots. You're talking about the cheetah ran off. Oh, so that's a different way of looking at the mindfulness concentration that's bringing that, whatever that mental capacity is, and you say, well, is that the bodhicitta? The resolve for bodhi? Well, it's the same chitta. So again, we have to be careful and not think these are different whole philosophical systems with whole different things. They're basically just different words with nuances that are getting at an underlying fundamental reality that this is something we have whole and complete. And as we function it, we can see it in different ways. And as it dysfunctions, we can see it in different ways and give it different terms. But the fundamental thing, the actual spirit of this, or the generic of this, is universal, unchanging, and applicable at all times to all people, anywhere, even though our language may vary. So at some point, you can get to the point where you want to debate, all the different consciousnesses. You want to look, so Xuanzang spins it this way, but so-and-so spins it, and the commentary spins it, and they're going back and forth. And then you think of sweep clean. Remember, this is the two brothers. One brother was really good at the philosophical and had all this down. So if you had a lecture, it wouldn't sound like me tonight. You guys would go, whoa, wow, really impressed with all the list and whatnot. And his brother couldn't remember a thing. So his brother would say, Fadnao Joshaputi, the afflictions are bodhi. He'd say, yeah, the afflictions, what was that other part? Or bodhi. Yeah, he said, our bodhi. What was the first part? The afflictions. He couldn't memorize a single line of text. So his brother was very erudite and very learned and really good. And when he lectured, it said like flowers fell. That's a good thing. That means it's a different metaphor. For us, it's like, what's so good about flowers falling? His brother couldn't even remember anything. And so the brother was despairing that he would ever realize the full awakening because he couldn't even understand the difference between Shur and Shin and blah, 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 and all the various ones. And the Buddha said, I'll give you an expedient. All I want you to do is just mindfully, just say sweep clean while you're cleaning the walks. And I want you to sweep clean inside and out. And all you have to do is sweep clean, sweep clean, sweep clean. And so the story goes, it's a funny story, and it says, right, sweep. What? Where's the clean? Yeah, clean. Oh, what was the first part again? Sweep. He says, I think I got it. Sweep, clean, sweep, clean, sweep, clean. So this goes on. What he does is he brings all of his faculties, all of his attention, all of his emotions, feelings, perceptions, all the skandhas, everything is just brought down to this single point, inside and outside, and he's just watching. He's sweeping clean the sidewalk, but he's also watching as every movement takes place, and he just brings it back, sweep clean, sweep clean, sweep clean. And eventually, he has an incredible understanding and breakthrough, and he attains a state of awakening of an arhat. And so the Buddha announces today, he says, today someone has broken through the dark barrel of avidya, of ignorance, and has seen their nature and lit up their mind. And this person can be a teacher for you. And the brother's going, well, yep, here I am. I just memorized another text. And he said, and they gave him the name Sweep Clean. He says, it's Sweep Clean. And his brother goes, what? Sweep Clean? This dumb brother of mine? And the Buddha says, come up, Sweep Clean. Sweep Clean just closes his eyes and starts to teach. And it's like, whoa. The spirit, the energy, the understanding in his simple, direct language about how this all works has this radiating effect on the group. And not only do they realize he's got it, but even their jealousies and whatnot melt under the impressiveness of his ability to speak in this way. And his brother is now turned a little bit dark because he missed the point that even though you might wrap your mind around all these things, unless you let go of the mind that wants to wrap around all these things, you won't liberate the mind. And learning then becomes an impediment to understanding. Now, learning is not an impediment to understanding. Don't get me wrong. Because if you say, oh, I don't need any books, I'm just going to go and sit. Well, I can tell you some stories about that. Okay? Both contemporary and ancient, but they amount to the same thing. Gaga goo goo nuts. Okay? But the mere study without the practice also turns into impediment. And so the two brothers, you could say, represent real differences in personalities, but you could say they also represent two polarities within our own nature, or two tendencies within our own nature. And bringing those two together is the trick. So although I did a very poor job of trying to tease out this somewhat philosophical concepts tonight, I hope what you take away is that it's all pointing back to spirit of a similar flavor, which is apply this and use this as a mechanism for liberation and understanding of your nature and mind, and not as something that you understand and hold to out there. Because that's the saying, having food and not eating and starving to death, mere study is the same way. So eat, but also look at the ingredients in the menu and be careful. Be careful what you eat, but do something like that. In 45 minutes, this is just the beginning. We'll probably come back to this again and again, but I wanted to go over some of it tonight in the hopes of trying to clarify both the complexity and why it's complex, and also the spirit and simplicity of what it's pointing to so that we don't get overwhelmed by the complexity. But we also don't just think this is some kind of, child's thing. Be good, be mindful, everything's okay. Be mindful where? Well, I'm being mindful, but my hatred's coming up. I'm mindful of my hatred. Well, good. But is it going down? No. So what does mindfulness mean? It doesn't just mean you're aware of what's arising, but you're understanding the ground of where it's coming from, and you're understanding what it could be instead of that, and you're understanding there's techniques to actually turn it, and not simply being aware. Okay? So I'll stop there for tonight. We ran out of time. I hope this will encourage you to look into this more carefully, and not ask me so many questions that I can't possibly answer. Okay, so anything to announce? Sure.
It's just a quick question. Will there be a class next Friday?
Oh.
Friday after Thanksgiving?
You read my mind. I asked our group last night, should we do it? And they said, ask everybody here. So I'm asking everybody here, as you know, this Thursday is a holiday called Thanksgiving, and I like it philosophically. It's a good thing to do that. However, it's also conflated with something that isn't very healthy, and it doesn't make any sense to me, which is called, I learned last night, Black Friday. So Thanksgiving is to be grateful for all the things we have. Black Friday is to be greedy for wanting more of that. I guess it's, yin and yang, whatever. In any event, Black Friday is also our class. Now, some of you think, I thought Friday was Black Friday, because no, my class is not Black Friday. Although it occurs on Friday, it's only Black Friday once a year. And you say, no, I think it's black every day. I go away confused, so it must be dark. Do you all want to meet Friday night next week, which is the day after Thanksgiving? How many people would come on Black Friday? Okay, that's enough to make a class. Now, what you do during the day, I pay no attention to. But do not, when they're sitting here, and I hear the shoes come off, I hear 5 shopping bags drop as well in the back. Okay? Okay, any announcements other than that?
Schedule like usual, tomorrow in the evening, after a short break, we can meet Rabbi Hampshire, who appear in the screen from the
Oh,
global meeting. We'll be continuing our Hadassah collection.
so you're streaming Hung Sure from Australia? Okay. Does he start with animals? Does he start with animals? Like when I Skype with him, when we translate together, I turn on my Skype screen and the first thing I see is some big snake or a spider the size of a basketball, and then you hear him, hey, that's my new friend. I thought, okay. Yeah. So let's just get to the text because I'm not particularly fond of those. I admit I'm not totally unattached. Spiders and snakes are not really, but so is that what he does here?
Please come and check.
Yeah, come and check. Okay. All right, let's do the transference in English. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light. Ding li san bao.